Mike Young to tell the BC Iron story. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I just want to say an appreciation to Jocelyn and my daughter Eloise for coming along. That was the trade-off for allowing them to go shopping in Sydney. As soon as she heard we were going to Sydney, she had booked the flight faster than you can say Chinese stimulus package. So it's great being back in Sydney. We do love this town, and I do enjoy coming here. So what I'm going to do today is give you a background of BC Iron. I'm not sure all of you know about us, but I'll give you the background of the company, how we got into production, and then I want to talk to you a little bit about the philosophy of how we did it, and hopefully you can take something away from that for yourselves in your own business and indeed in your own lives. It's not to be a lecture on how to do business, but just how we did it and some of the innovative things we did. In terms of the history, we listed in December 2006. At that time, I was the only employee for the company. We had no office, no staff, and no work had ever been done on the project. I basically was the chief geologist. I was the chief environmental officer, chief heritage officer, and we started drilling in April of 2007. And in that time, Cyclone George came through as well and sort of held us up. So we were focused on getting into drilling as soon as we could and boots on the ground. So that's me standing at the first drill hole back in December 2007. We discovered iron ore with the first hole. It was luck rather than design because it wasn't our first drill target, but it was the first place we could get to after the cyclone. We then spent the next several years drilling, in that time talking to FMG, and by 2009 we had a joint venture with FMG to provide rail and port infrastructure in exchange for 50% of the iron deposit. We started construction in 2010, and by 2011 we'd started our exporting. And this year I'm pleased to say that we had an EBITDA of about 70 million. We've just announced that we've hit 5 million tonnes exported for the project, and we announced a maiden dividend of 15 cents a share. So we did that in a little over 5 years, which is a good outcome. Company snapshot for the financial types in the room. Fairly tight registry. We've got 3 shareholders on over 50% of the shares, and it is indeed one of our issues, is that we have very low liquidity. And top 20 about 77%. In terms of, we've got 103 million shares on issue. Market cap's about 280 with an EV of around 200. So you can see we're a very tight register, and as we all say when we're up on these stands, a little bit undervalued. Cash in the bank's about 90 million. Performance over the last 12 months has been good, about 20% improvement compared to our peers, and I think that's holding us in good stead with the market. I won't dwell too much on the board. Tony Kiernan's our chairman. He's been chairman since we listed. He was one of the founders, and some of the other people on the board. Morgan Ball's our finance director. Now he's the perfect finance director. He does the worrying for me. He goes grey for me. He's a great bloke, and he's good to have on the board. And the other 2 guys on the board, Malcolm McComas, who's from Sydney and sort of brings that East Coast perspective to things. We get a little bit living in a bubble over in the West sometimes. And Jamie Gibson from one of our big shareholders, Regent Pacific. My background, as Julian said, I'm a geologist. I spent a lot of time working on mines or near mines, and so my experience is resource development. And I guess in the last 25 years I've been in Australia, the exposure to mines really gave me the philosophy of getting into production. So we weren't about drilling holes and announcing results. We were about getting the mine going. The project itself is located in the Pilbara region, just north of FMG's operations, and that's a railway line going up to Port Hedland. It's a 50-50 JV for the iron rights. All the costs and all the profits are split 50-50. Each ship goes out to customers. We just basically split the revenues from that ship and then have cash calls. We operate everything. BC Iron is the operator, including managing the rail and port, well, managing the contractor, who is FMG. And the product itself, called Bonnie Fines, I'm going to expand on that a little bit more. Last financial year was a great year. We mined and shipped export tons. We hit all our export targets, and we had a cash balance of almost 100 million at the end of the quarter, and then announced a maiden dividend, 15 cents, fully franked. We exceeded all our guidance targets for the year, which I think surprised the market, and something I'll talk a bit more about. And importantly, because of our relationship with FMG, we are exporting on Cape-sized vessels, sometimes at over 200,000 tons each shipment. So that gives us a huge advantage in terms of costs compared to using Panamax vessels. And we're getting strong support for Bonnie Fine's product in China. Now, how did we do it? And this is what the talk is about today. And why have I got the Apple symbol up there? Well, I read the book about Steve Jobs, and there was a really interesting passage in there when Apple decided to go and do a joint venture with Xerox. And Xerox, in fact, had invented the Windows platform that you see, the graphical user interface. And one of their engineers for Apple was the guy who invented the thing that when you see on a computer how files sit over top of one another, well, in reality, that doesn't really happen. It's a one-dimensional screen, and no one had written the code for that. Now, you've got to remember, this is back in the 80s. This is very, very advanced stuff. So he actually wrote the code so that files could sit on top of one another because he thought the guys at Xerox had done it. But in fact, they hadn't. And he had done it because he didn't know he couldn't do it. And what he said in the book was, because I didn't know it couldn't be done, I was enabled to do it. I got a feeling for the empowering aspect of naivete. Now that really resonated with me, and the reason is because we've done a lot of things that people said we couldn't or shouldn't do. So what I'm going to do is show a 4-minute movie, because we're in production now, and if you're an iron ore company in production, you do show movies at these things. That's par for the course. And what this movie will do is give you an overview of the company. It'll give you an overview of the operations so that you have in your mind's eye what we're doing. And I'll just get Maestro to start it. Thanks.
BC Iron is an iron ore development and mining company with key assets in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. The company listed on the ASX in December 2006 and transitioned from an explorer to a producer in just over 4 years. BC Iron's core focus is the Nullagine Iron Ore Project, a 50-50 joint venture with Fortescue Metals Group.
We're sitting at the Mining Operations Centre. We're about 2 kilometres from the first drill hole that we drilled in April 2007. So no work had ever been done up here before, and we were a small company. And within a month we knew we had a mineable ore deposit. And my background as a resource geologist was such that I knew getting into development was the key to growing the company.
Between 2007 and 2009, BC Iron concentrated on developing its reserves and commenced negotiations with Fortescue. In July 2007, BC Iron signed a Memorandum of Understanding with Fortescue to use Fortescue's rail and port infrastructure. The critical issue for iron ore mining in Western Australia is having access to port and rail infrastructure. This was the key reason for BC Iron's success, which they recognised very early on. BC Iron focused on getting into production and owning a mine to generate revenue to grow the company.
BC Iron is operating a profitable mine in a stable commodity, and over that period of time we've created considerable value for our shareholders and staff. Looking forward, BC Iron will continue to operate its Pilbara mine efficiently and effectively. As part of the process, we'll be seeking to increase the inventory on site by the utilisation of new technologies and production techniques.
In 2009, BC Iron conducted a test pit, employing a new mining technique using surface miners. These machines allowed them to conduct a low-impact and low-risk mining operation. The conventional drill and blast process is eliminated, replaced with a simple mining and crushing process with low stripping ratios and minimal environmental impact. The 50-50 JV ensures that BC Iron own half and Fortescue own half of the ore produced. However, it is treated as one parcel of ore, which passes through the Fortescue system before it is shipped to customers in China as joint venture ore. The JV has mined at a throughput rate of 3 million tonnes per annum since November 2011. Production capacity will increase to 5 million tonnes per annum by June 2012, providing BC Iron with healthy margins and real leverage for future growth.
Looking forward, we'll seek to lever off the relationship we have with FMG and increase our production footprint within the Pilbara. BC Iron has a deliberate and clear strategy to be proactive in seeking further acquisitions and opportunities. As we look to the future, our proven strategies, our management experience, coupled with our knowledge of iron ore resource opportunities throughout the world and Australia, will drive BC Iron to its next chapter of success.
The MOU, I might add, was non-binding. Just wanted to make sure. So that should give you an overview of the site. You can see there's no pits there. We're mining mesas or flat-topped hills. And I'll just click along here. So the things that we were empowered to do by not knowing we couldn't do them. Well, we did first hold a producer in under 4 years. We did a JV with Fortescue, which at the time a lot of people derided us for. We were using surface miners instead of drill and blast, something else that people didn't think could be done. We constructed a 55-kilometre bitumen haul road in the middle of the Pilbara at no small cost, and we reached our production rate of 5 million tonnes per annum by June 30, 2012. Again, a lot of doubt in the industry that we would achieve that, and we're remaining profitable even at the lower iron prices. Lastly, we're very active in business development, where a lot of people think maybe you should be pulling your head in and retreating a little bit. Right now is a really good opportunity to be looking at expanding the company. So we'll talk about these a bit more. First hole and first ship in 4 years. Well, it was actually 3 years, 10 months and 1 day. That was because of key relationships early with the key stakeholders, FMG, the Balgoo, traditional owners, and the government departments. We insist on peer-to-peer relationships at all levels. So in other words, guys who work for FMG and the guys who work for BC Iron talk to each other at their peer level before anything comes up to me and I have to go across to Nev or Andrew. And that's the way we do things. And very rarely do I have to get involved. It's a great relationship. And that works at government level as well. We did very rapid and low-impact drill assessments. We used tracked rigs and helicopter-supported rigs so that we could get in there and see what we had early. And that meant that we could start planning early. We used probable ore reserves for our definitive feasibility study. Now this is a bit more technical, but what that means is that's one level of, I guess, confidence down from what you'd normally do in a DFS. We were dealing with iron ore. It did stick out of the ground. You could see it on Google, so we were fairly confident it was there. And we decided to go forward on that. And we did our definitive feasibility study in-house. So that guy in the photograph, Blair Duncan, he's our COO. He wrote the study. We, of course, went outside to outside parties to do some of the work and did a peer review on the reserves. But basically, it was done in-house. And most people said, you can't do that. Now, you notice I didn't call it a bankable feasibility study. We just call it a definitive feasibility study. And we did a lot of things concurrently rather than consecutively. So too many people depend on Gantt charts where they go, well, we have to finish A before we can do B, before we can do C. We did A, B, and C together. We were halfway through our feasibility study before we'd finished drilling. But we knew that a lot of the work, a lot of the early work could be done early, particularly environmental and heritage. So this was just sort of thinking outside the square, if you like, and a lot of it comes down to that guy in the photograph. He's currently in Brazil, actually having a look at some projects down there. The joint venture with Fortescue. Well, that was actually a lot easier than a lot of people think. We started talking to Fortescue in 2006 before we even listed. And the reason was there's a lot of iron ore deposits in the world, but there's not a lot of railway and not a lot of port. So our strategy in Brazil is actually to find if we can get on infrastructure before we even start looking at finding iron ore deposits. So that started very early. And you've got to remember at the time, Fortescue was trying to get on BHP's railway line. So we became their third-party poster boy, if you like. And we knew that. We knew the politics of what was going on, and at that time it was purely political. We were there seeking access on their railway as they were seeking access on BHP's railway, and that worked for both parties. We signed the MOU in 2007 and moved to a JV 2 years later, and then moved to our test pit. And at that time, Fortescue's paradigm shifted from it being a political relationship to being an operational relationship, and they made that switch very quickly and were very, very helpful at getting us up and running. Having that rail and port services agreement obviously is key, and one of the things that people don't know is that FMG went above and beyond their obligations to help us, and we were putting out partial shipments of iron ore. In other words, we were loading the ship with Bonnie fines, and they would finish the ship off with their own ore to get the stuff to market. And that was something they didn't have to do. It was at additional cost to them, but they did it so that we could get shipping early and get the cash flow going. Having access to their marketing department is tremendous, as you'd imagine. They do a great job of marketing, and they've developed a product in the marketplace called Bonnie Fines. As I said, I think in the press release yesterday, we've had more requests for Bonnie Fines in the last 4 weeks than we've had in the last 2 years. So there's clearly a lot of interest in the product. And as I said before, we use Cape-sized vessels, which gives us a huge competitive advantage. The photograph there, that's our first ore on ship back in February 2011. And that's when I had my Toyota moment when I jumped into the air and said we'd finally done it. Surface miners. The surface miners are working very well because we're mining flat tabular ore bodies. These things are a bit like combine harvesters, if you like. They just basically go through, cut the ore, leave it on the ground. You can see from that air photo there some of the cut material, and then we push it up into piles, take it to the mill, crush it, ship it. It's a very simple, boring operation. In fact, when we take analysts up to site, you basically stand around for most of the day because once they've seen it for 10 minutes, there's nothing else to see. But that's good because boring means low risk, and low risk means low cost. It's very selective because we're mining 250 millimeter slices. The guys can actually visually go pick the ore and waste. And we have good ore recovery and good reconciliations. And because we're up on mesas, we're sitting up on these flat top tills, the surface miners allow us to do good mesa edge management, so we don't have material spilling into the creeks in the area. We're supported by Wattpac Mining, who are doing a really good job over there. Again, something else that people said we shouldn't do. Wattpac didn't have a lot of experience in surface mining, or mining in fact, but that was good because they didn't come in with a paradigm of drill and blast. I'm convinced that if we had used another mining contractor, they would have given the surface miners maybe 2 or 3 months and said, they don't work, we're going to do drill and blast. If that had happened, we would have lost 20% of the ore body through dilution. So the use of surface miners has paid off, and we're about to put a much bigger unit on, up on site. The haul road. It's a 55-kilometer bitumen haul road through the middle of the Pilbara. It's 13.5 meters long, and those trucks that we use are 360-ton payload trucks. They're not road legal, which is why we had to build the road. 2 of them passing there. Bitumen seal, as I said, gives us a high level of safety. We do have massive rain events in the Pilbara, and we do bus people up and down the road to the airport at Christmas Creek. It allows rapid ramp up after a rain event. So you notice we use the term rain event in the Pilbara because this isn't sort of a summer shower. These are big events, and roads can be closed for weeks. So we were able to, with a bitumen road, a cyclone went through late in the season, went right over our camp, dumped a lot of rain, didn't cause any damage. Within 4 days, we were back up at full production. The other thing it does is it lowers operating costs significantly. The trucks are running on bitumen, and we don't have to do maintenance on the road with graders and water trucks. We don't have any water up there. Water's scarce, so water management is very important, and not having to water your haul road to keep the dust down is a huge factor. It also gives us optionality for a bicycle race, which I'm hoping to do. It's one of my passions, and I'll keep you posted on that one. Mining, as I said, we're doing Wattpac. We're using Wattpac, we're using surface miners, and we're at nameplate of above 5 million tonnes per annum. We have a 5 million tonne contract with FMG to provide rail and haulage, but we've actually built the operation to run at 6 million in case FMG decides there's spare capacity and we can use it. So all of the machines and the mill is upgraded to about 6 million tonnes per year. The haulage is done by Toll Resources. They bought Mitchell's, who did the original tender to the contract. We have 8 of these power units on site, 360-ton payload, 96 wheels. Trying to get wheels is a real issue, and they're supplemented by a couple of Bigfoot rigs that we use when these are on standby. Now, in the photograph, the truck looks rather large. There's a person in the photograph there next to the truck. That's my mother. She's about 5'4". Makes the truck look bigger. But you can see I'm very family-oriented. I brought my mom up the site, 82 years old, went for a ride in a dump truck. Absolutely loved it. Went home. She was the expert on mining. My brothers hated me for it, as you can imagine. And the Rail and Port Services by TPI Fortescue. It's a world-class port, obviously, and we're very happy to be using it. And as I said, partial shipments during a ramp-up phase made it possible. So again, things people said we shouldn't do, the Wattpack and those big trucks. Remaining profitable, operating in a lower price environment. Well, this is the key thing now, I think. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this now and spend some time on this. Metal prices, the China drivers. Everyone has an opinion on this. I'm no different, and I'll give you my opinion. Marketing of Bonnie Fines, we'll talk a bit about that. We'll talk about our joint venture, our operating costs, and the drivers for those. This is a steel intensity curve. It's a little bit crowded, but basically what it's doing is it's showing you along the bottom graph GDP per person in a country. Along the vertical axis is steel usage in kilograms per person. And what happens is as a country is basically gearing up, United States, South Korea, and Taiwan, you start to grow, your steel use grows as your GDP grows in a very steep curve. And then it flattens off. As you go from being a building society and infrastructure dominant into a consumer society, it flattens off. Obviously, South Korea and Taiwan are a little bit more infrastructure intensive, big shipbuilders, big project items like that. But by and large, you sit in these zones. Australia would be off the chart. Australia's GDP is, I think I have it here. I'll just bring it up. No, I don't. Yeah, it's on the next one. I'll just bring that up in a sec. But Australia's GDP is quite high. It's about 65,000. Our metal usage is actually quite low, surprisingly. It's about 267 kilograms per person. But when you think about it, we all live in brick and tile homes, so we don't use a lot of steel compared to other countries. Now, China is often thought of as a single country, whereas it really isn't. It's a collective of nations, small nations or states, which is overseen by an unelected government. So it's kind of like the EU, if you think hard about it. Now what happens is you've got all these different states who have different governments who are competing with one another. Now what this graph is, it's exactly the same thing. It's a steel intensity curve, but those bubbles are populations. Way up on the top right, you've got Shanghai, Beijing, and Tianjin. Now they're well up the curve. They're affluent. There's a middle class there. They're doing okay. In the middle, you've got some of the big provinces in the east and also in the center. And then down on the left, a long way down the curve, you've got the bulk of the population in China. And no matter what you say and what you read, and there is a propensity for the press in Australia to really get on about bad news. You rarely read good news about China, but geez, there's a lot of bad news. No matter what you read, that's a bunch of people who want something better for their kids than they had. It's nothing different than what people in this room think. So those people want to move into the middle of that graph at least, and move towards the right if they can. So China's got a long way to go. Yes, it's been through a bit of a blip. It's been exacerbated by the traders, of course, because the price that you see in the press every day is a very low volume spot price. And the traders are buying and selling on a ship-by-ship basis, driving that price up and down. My belief is that China's got a long way to go. The growth, the government is committed to sustainable growth. So the double-digit growth that we saw, that's gone. I don't think we'll see that again, but the government certainly wants to grow. And they want it to be sustainable, and they want it to be coordinated. And I believe that after we get through this leadership transition, you'll see some more stability come back into what's happening in China. And certainly, if you think about it, China is a government-run country, and every company is government-run. Well, almost every big company is government-run. So decisions made by the government affect people at company levels, not like Australia. We can have an election and still have a business, but over there they're going through election processes, and it's affecting everyone and affecting the decision making. Once they get through it, I think you'll see some stability and you'll see the prices return to more sustainable levels. Now, what are we doing about it? We've got a really good product called Bonnie Fines. It's the same as the same sort of material that they sell at BHP is selling from Yandi. It's well recognized in the market. Importantly for us, and I'm sorry at the back it's a bit small, we've got very low impurities, particularly phosphorus and sulfur. These are really two very important impurities in the steel mills, and that's why people are really interested in buying our product. Fortescue provide the marketing services, and we sell the product on the CFR 62 price. Now, that won't mean a lot to a lot of you, but what it means is we're getting a premium price for our ore, and it's only adjusted for the iron grades, which is great. And that is because of the efforts of Fortescue and the marketing department. This graph just basically shows bubbles, their sizes of deposits, production, and this along this graph is low phosphorus on the right-hand side and high iron on the axis, and that's where we're sitting here. So we've got a very low phosphorus product with a very high calcined iron grade. And I won't get into the details, but suffice to say it's a popular product in the market. And what about our costs? This is a graph that's getting a lot of airplay recently. This is actually a price curve. What it shows is it shows tons of iron ore produced by various producers cumulatively along this axis. Sorry about that, wrong button. It's a big mistake for a geek. Along this axis is tons produced, and along this axis is the production costs. You can see things like Vale, BHP, and Rio are in here. Big tons, low costs. We're just here. This is our graph here for our targeted OPEX, and that's the average price that we received during September. So it's important to know that with the spot price, that's a daily price. Most people are on a longer term than that, and we're doing it on a monthly average. So we've still got good margins between our operating costs and the price. Now that price obviously comes down a bit for iron grade. We have fixed and variable contracts for everything from the mine to the customer. So that keeps our costs down. There is a rise and fall component related to manpower, fuel, and consumables, but by and large that doesn't affect it too badly. Our cash operating costs from the mine to the ship's rail, including the deal with FMG, is $45 to $50 a tonne for the life of mine. Right now it's operating at the lower part of that, and that'll vary with ore race ratios as we go forward in the mining operation. Cash costs on top of that also include things like state royalties, Aboriginal royalties, marketing, and head office costs. Now you notice there's no MRRT there, because we won't be paying an MRRT. But it cost us $500,000 in consultant fees to figure that out. So I'm in the wrong business. The reason we're not paying the MRRT is basically because of the royalty relief, but also the cost having come down. The RSPT and its illegitimate son, the MRRT, were both designed to be super profits taxes, and that's exactly what they are. And now that we've seen metal prices come back to more sustainable and realistic levels, you'll note that the MRRT won't be collecting quite the revenue they believed it would. Our expenditure, capital expenditure for the year is about $25 million, but our sustaining capital on a year-by-year basis will be around $5 million. So you can see it's a very cheap operation. When the prices were coming down, nobody in our company panicked. We still had the margins. We continue to have the margins, and we've got good, healthy cash flows. Lastly, we are very active in business development. We're focused, we're generating cash, and we have good partnerships. We want to take that experience into places like Brazil. Now, why Brazil? We have three priorities. We want to extend the mine life at Nullagine, which we're doing through drilling and beneficiation test work on some of the low grade. We want to extend the influence of the joint venture. So we have a great relationship. We want to find other deposits nearby, bring those into the joint venture to extend the mine life. And thirdly, once you step outside of the joint venture with FMG, I personally don't see a lot of opportunity in Australia for iron ore. It's very hard to get infrastructure, and the future infrastructure that's being planned is going to be difficult, and it's going to be expensive. So we're looking elsewhere, and particularly Brazil, and we're looking at taking our experience, particularly in the approvals process, and taking that to Brazil. And the reason is, and I'll let the secret out of the bag, the way they're currently mining in Brazil, particularly small operations, not Vale and the big operations, but the smaller ones, and there's a lot of them, is very similar to the way we used to mine here in the 80s. Small truck and shovel, small operations, very inefficient. Plus, the approvals process in Brazil has moved into the 21st century. And a lot of people cite this as a reason not to be in Brazil. Well, it's a good reason not to be in Australia. But we think with the experience that we've got and the intellectual property we've got, having built up over 25 years through this approvals process in Western Australia, we can bring that to people in Brazil through partnerships and help them get up to where they need to be through efficiencies and approvals. And that's why we're looking in Brazil, and sending Blair there was deliberate, because he's the guy that did our approvals and knows how to do this. So in summary, how to be naive. Well, firstly, you don't say can't. So these pictures are the future. This is an offshore processing, an offshore facility for loading ships. So I just said we have infrastructure constraints, but there's ways around it. We did what we did because we didn't know we couldn't. I like to avoid people who say it's just the way we've always done it. I really hate it when people say that. People shouldn't think that way. Continue to gain expertise, but avoid thinking like an expert. I'm not an expert on China. I spend a lot of time reading about China and trying to understand China, and I'll probably be spending the rest of my life doing it. But I read and read and read, and just keep learning. New ideas are only part of the solution, of course. You have to implement them, and that's really the winning move. And that's really what I think we did well, was we had these ideas. They were out of left field, if you like, but we implemented those ideas. And there's the old saying, who dares wins. Now, there is one person I think that encapsulates this spirit, and being an Olympic year, albeit over, I thought I'd put his picture up. And there's a man there who didn't say, I can't do it, and he won a gold medal. So, look, you've got to think outside the box. You are what you think. And did you ever stop to think and then forgot to think again? Really, the word is think. And I'd like to thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, mate. You too.
Thank